If a client approached you about building 6 feet tall letters and their logo, but they needed it delivered 2 hours away in 3 weeks, what would you say? Well, like anyone would say, what's your budget? Am I right? Assuming the budget was adequate, would you say yes? Well, I did, and this is how I built it. Here is the scope of the job. To create 6 foot tall, 18-inch thick letters that would be used for a conference. They'd be sat outside the entrance of the convention center for people to walk by and take pictures with. They need to be able to sit out in the rain, used year after year, and painted white so they can have light projected on them and make them look different colors. Also, they wanted their logo built with the same specifications, except it needed to be 6 feet wide as well as tall. Everything needed to look the same from all sides, so no front or back. For example, no backer board on the logo. I paid my friend Jeremy, who is a fantastic woodworker, to work out of my shop for a day. Check out Burke Country Custom on Facebook to see more of his amazing work. This was money well spent because it gave me a big jump start on this project. It took the two of us an 8-hour day to fully construct the A, L, T, and to get started on the S. The A, L, and T were all constructed the same. We started by laying out and cutting the shape of each letter out of 3/4 inch plywood. We needed a front and back for each letter, so we stacked 2 sheets on top of each other and cut them both at the same time. My track saw came in clutch for this project. And what the track saw couldn't reach in the corners, we used a pull saw to finish the cut. Once we had the front and back of a letter, we ripped down the same 3/4 inch plywood into 15-inch widths. This would become the material used to connect the front and the back of each letter, giving us an overall depth or thickness of approximately 17.5. For assembly, we glued and screwed everything. We would lay one of the letter faces flat on the ground and started adding the side pieces. We used pocket holes to connect the first side, and then we pre-drilled and screwed through the face of the second side. All 3 of these letters went together pretty quickly, considering how large they were. Next up, the S. We started by laying out the overall shape. Big thanks to my wife for helping out and taking the lead on laying this out. She used a grid system to create points and then connected the points. I tried to make a 3-part stencil on my CNC, but it was more trouble than it was worth. However, it was handy to use one of the sections of it to trace the curves. After everything was laid out, I used the jigsaw and track saw to cut out the shape. For the construction of the S, we approached it the same way we did the L, A, and T. But what about those curves? Jeremy and I considered 2 techniques: kerf bending the plywood, making kerf cuts on one side and bending the plywood around the corner, or making a stencil of each corner and layering the plywood together where the edge grain would be pointed out. As you can see here, this is what we decided on. The reason we didn't do kerf bending is we didn't know if the thin material left behind after the kerf cut would hold up outdoors long term. So what we ended up with was 22 layers of 3/4 inch plywood. All 4 of the outside corners were the same. So we needed 88 of those layers, and then we needed a total of 88 layers to make the other 4 curves. That's a total of 172 total layers to make all these corners. I cut every single one of them out on the bandsaw, but I found that gluing 5 or 6 layers of plywood together and making one cut was a lot faster. So I attached these corners to the face, and just like all the other letters, I used 3/4 inch plywood to connect all them together. One thing I had to do was square all the ends of the curved sections so the plywood between had something straight to screw to. I did this using my miter saw, which was kind of sketchy, but it worked. I also added some 2x4 supports to the interior of the S. Not sure if it was needed or not in the end, but it made me feel better. I filled in all the cracks and voids with wood filler as I went along. From this point, it was a lot of filling and sanding to get everything prepared to be painted. Since these are going to be outside for 1 week out of the year, I painted them with 3 coats of exterior paint. The last component to finish this build was the logo. I built this in 4 sections using the same technique as I did on the letters. The tricky part with this one was how it would come together structurally. We came up with the idea to use this blocking that was painted black so it disappears from the rest of the logo. This was the main structural support to this piece. Then we used L brackets to connect the tops and bottoms together. L brackets come in 90 degrees typically, but we needed them to be more like 135 degrees. So I heated them up with a torch and bent them until they matched the angle we needed. This logo ended up being a lot more rigid than I thought it was going to be and ended up working out great. So if you're curious, this is the total materials and labor it took to pull this build off. We used a total of 19 sheets of 3/4 inch plywood, 3 gallons of paint, 3 pounds of wood filler, 1 gallon of wood glue, hundreds of screws, a U-Haul rental, and a total of about 80 hours of labor. After everything had its final coat of paint, it was time to deliver. Don't they look great in their final location? Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next thing I'm building. These builds seem to come out of nowhere, and I'm always up for a challenge, so you never know what's next. I rarely even know what's next, but isn't that the fun of it? This is the biggest Andy Bird Builds project to date, and I couldn't have done it alone. Thanks to Jeremy, Carson, Kenny, Bao, John Mark, and most of all, my wife, for helping and letting this project take over our lives and house for over a week.